Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the first virtual session for Pivot 2023. I am your moderator and host, Joe Batir, company Teverra. I'm excited to be bringing to you today these four wonderful guests talking about what's new in the next generation of geothermal startup ecosystem. So instead of me introducing them, I'm going to let them all introduce themselves and get right into the questions and start talking. So we're going to do a quick round of introductions, and I am just going to go from left to right on my screen. So starting with Arpit.
Sure. My name is Arpit. I'm the founder, CEO at Cache Energy. We are doing long duration storage. We are based out of Illinois, Champaign, Illinois, 2 hours from Chicago. We were the winners of Department of Energy Innovation Prize, recently closed our oversubscribed seed round, and excited to be part of the panel.
All right, Arpit, thank you for joining us. Derek.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening or good night, I guess, depending on where you're calling in from for Pivot this year. I'm Derek Adams. I'm the CEO and co-founder of EarthBridge Energy. We're a startup developing a grid-scale geothermal energy storage technology that really combines the best aspects of geothermal, oil and gas technology, and energy storage into a single solution. My background is in geoscience and project management. I was with ExxonMobil for over 10 years in a variety of roles, but always focused on the reservoir and really the potential that they have to deliver energy. And so when it was time to pivot into renewables, it just made a ton of sense to be able to use a reservoir for energy storage. And we knew we needed to be successful. We had to have a strong team. So we've got folks from geothermal development, the subsurface side, both technical and commercial, energy storage and power markets, and renewable energy development. So key to our success, though, I think we're going to talk about this a little later, is really the strong partnerships that we've been able to develop with national labs, the DOE, academia, and other industry partners. So really happy to be here today. And just before we get started, I wanted to send a quick thank you note out to all of those with Project Interspace, Jamie Beard, and the whole team for working so hard year after year to make Pivot, big success. So happy to be here.
All right, Derek, thank you. And now jumping over to Saeed.
Saeed Salehi here. I'm currently associate professor at College of Earth and Energy at University of Oklahoma. In the past 6 years, I've been involved in different aspects of geothermal energy, from being a project director for different consortiums. And also as part of my role, I've been working with several geothermal energy startups for helping them with technology commercialization or deployment. And my background is on my training as a petroleum engineer. I worked in the oil and gas industry and transitioned to applying those skills into geothermal energy. I'm very excited to be part of this panel, and likewise, I really appreciate your space and all the panelists being here today.
All right, Saeed, thank you. And finally, rounding out the panel, Paris.
Hey everybody, my name is Paris Smalls. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Eden GeoPower Inc. We are developing a next generation hard rock stimulation technology, mainly focused on enhanced geothermal systems. So the problem that we're addressing is that when you traditionally hydraulically fracture these reservoirs, you often create these short circuits in the reservoir to where you have one dominant fracture that takes up the majority of the fluid flow. So what we're harnessing is using electricity in combination with hydraulic stimulation to better target and stimulate underperforming fractures, so will help increase the overall power production of enhanced geothermal systems. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Paris, thank you. So now we are going to get opening the floor to audience questions, but we are going to start with a few canned questions that I've prepared, trying to make sure we talk about the idea and the theme of 2023, that is building bridges. And some of those bridges may need to be built in terms of they are not yet there. We can see a chasm that we need to get over. And then some bridges may have people on both sides that just need to start holding hands. So this question is really going to be a two-parter for everybody. the idea of what is that overarching challenge that you personally or in your company, what you're trying to solve. What is that challenge? Why do you see that challenge as being the hard kind of linchpin for geothermal? And then with that, if you want to get into the second part of that, what challenges do you still see that you know exist that you are not addressing, that you think are where you are going to need help, where you're going to need that collaboration component? Paris, you are up on my screen. You've already started answering the question, so I'm going to let you keep going.
Yeah, I'll elaborate more about some of the issues with heat harvesting from geothermal reservoirs. So it's not, you have to think about, in order for the economics to work and EGS, you need to be able to get the LCOE down, let's say, in the most ideal situation, 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour, let's say. But you want to be able to sustain the power production of the reservoir for as long as possible in order for you to have that LCOE come down. So a big issue right now that they've had in the past with previous enhanced geothermal system demonstrations is that when they stimulate and fracture the reservoir, maybe at first you begin producing hot enough fluids that you're able to get, megawatt scale energy out of it. But when you have only one fracture that's taking the majority of the fluid flow, what's going to happen is that fracture starts to cool down, the reservoir cools down, and your reservoir performance goes down. So your LCOE goes up because you're not able to maintain energy production over 20, 30 years, which is what you need. You need your reservoir to be able to be hot enough over a sustained period of time, decades, in order for you to have an economic project. Now, there have been some recent breakthroughs in EGS that a lot of us are aware of, and I think that's great. But we still have to continue to look at what kind of different rock formations, what kind of different strategies do we need to have to make sure that for the next reservoir and the next reservoir, we don't have these issues for short circuiting or they call it thermal breakdown in these kind of geologies. And every single reservoir is different. So one of the biggest challenges that I see in geothermal that people aren't necessarily addressing, when you think about geothermal, there's a lot of talk about drilling, and that's great. And there needs to be more drilling, and there's all kinds of companies working on new drilling techniques to get down there to the rock. But you can drill down there, but if you can't stimulate it, if you can't create a good fracture network that's going to have long-time thermal performance, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to get the power production you need. So of course, people need to be focused more on stimulation techniques. There's challenges with that. EGS or deep geothermal is like, it's really hot. You're talking 250, 300 plus degrees C. It makes it very difficult to have tools work downhole. It's very difficult for you to be able to identify and isolate what fractures you want to stimulate in the reservoir. So there's a lot of people that's doing work on reservoir characterization that I think is super important for us to be able to understand and be able to model these systems. And Eden, our company, is working on a couple of these solutions in-house to where we have our own numerical modeling team that we're developing. We're developing our own code. We're developing our own well completion strategies for geothermal and our own different equipment that we're bringing to these sites to do these kind of experiments.
That is very interesting, and I think you make a really good point that the drilling is one aspect of the project, and then you still have to stimulate, and that's when you start making your money in a 10 to 15 year lifetime of that project. Now, I'd like to kick this over to Derek, because Derek, you've got what y'all are doing at EarthBridge is a little bit different. Still trying to answer that challenge of how do you utilize, or how do you actually have all of this power and utilize it? So Derek, let's have you give your answer to the question.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the challenge we're trying to solve, really, frankly, the genesis of EarthBridge was kind of my realization that we waste a lot of renewable energy. We have an abundance, right, of renewable energy, mainly solar and wind. And due to the mismatch between, when that energy is available and when there's demand for that power, a lot of it goes to waste or it gets curtailed. I mean, California is curtailing like crazy. Texas is a similar problem. The duck curve is emerging in just about every grid across the U.S. and the world. And so I guess so wind and solar are not slowing down either, right? They're only accelerated. I think they're looking to grow probably 3 to 4x by 2030. So the need to be able to store that energy instead of wasting it is huge, and particularly long duration energy storage. And we're talking, more than 10 hours, we're talking 24 hours, days, weeks, even months, kind of seasonal storage on length. And so that need is going to be growing, exponentially as we green the grid with variable renewables. So that's why we're focused on developing a long duration energy storage technology. We call it the geo battery. Everybody's got maybe a different name for it, but we want to save that wasted power for when it's needed and wherever it's needed. There are challenges. There's challenges on the technical side. In a nutshell, what our technology is a type of pumped thermal energy storage, or also known as a Carnot battery, where we use waste power to withdraw non-potable water from a shallow, either brackish or brine reservoir below drinking water aquifers, but still pretty shallow. Think a couple thousand feet. And we bring that to the surface, and the way the heat pump works is it simultaneously produces hot and cold brine, which we then re-inject into that same reservoir in a different zone of that same reservoir. And then that, the Earth is a really good insulator. So it's a good thermos. It holds that thermal energy in for a long period of time, be it, daily with solar, or, multiple days or weeks if you're looking at wind. And then we bring it back to the surface when that renewable energy is not available and the demand's there, and we generate power, or just use it directly for the heat or for the cold, which, because we're storing the cold, is pretty exciting. So the challenges, there's technical challenges. We're addressing those through partnerships with 3 different national labs. We have partnered with NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab, Idaho National Lab, and Berkeley Labs to validate and also help to optimize really the efficiency of the storage cycle. And we're also partnered with other industry partners, one in particular, a company that's looking at increasing the efficiency of converting thermal energy to electricity, which is applicable. It's a challenge for all thermal generation, including baseload geothermal. So those have been huge and extremely valuable. The other half of the equation then also, though, is the commercial side. So there are a lot of, you can have the best technology in the world, but unless you're commercializing it and selling it and building projects to actually get us to a net zero future, you really need that half of the company to make a business. So we've got partnerships behind the meter and also in front of the meter, primarily with wind and solar, right? Those are the folks that are hurting, that are curtailing so much energy, but also utilities, or even the grid itself, depending on the market you're in, whether you're more regulated or deregulated. And so those are pretty key for us to commercialization and rollout of the projects that we have in our pipeline. Typical projects, right, are funded, and any energy project is funded through a fairly long-term power purchase agreement, a PPA. Whether it's geothermal or wind and solar or what have you. Energy storage is a little different beast. Maybe we could talk about it a little later. I know Arpit's probably going to talk about it too, but we act a lot more like a natural gas peaker plant, where we're dispatching energy on demand, and it gives us a little more flexibility with how you structure some of the power offtake contracts, and gives some breathing room, some creativity that my co-founder Gus Perez has to be able to really find the right solution depending on the market you're in. So these are challenges. We're tackling them head on. We're confident that these partnerships are really, on the technical and the commercial side, are really how we get to scale commercially, and so we can meet emissions goals. I think it's frankly, it's an exciting time, right, to see geothermal being used in new ways to solve new problems to enable the energy transition, and we're happy to be part of it.
Yep, very good. Now, Arpit, you are also working on energy storage. What do you see as those largest challenges with energy storage right now, and how are you addressing those?
Yeah, I think Derek made it so much easier for me to, expand on this. But the problem with existing storage solution is they do not scale, meaning they're not able to store a large quantity of energy cost effectively. And that's why we need long duration storage. So when you're saying long duration, basically what we are meaning is like being able to store a large quantity of energy cost effectively. So that's exactly what we are doing. One of the things, which is fairly known about energy storage, is of course what Derek said, demand and supply mismatch based on time. So, sometimes you have more supply than you have demand and vice versa. So storage helps, kind of serve that need in time. But what is overlooked, I guess, is also in space. So the demand and supply always not mismatch just in time, but also in space. So what is unique about our long duration storage technology is we are able to store energy in a solid material, which then is at room temperature, even in charged state, doesn't lose energy even when you're storing it for like 6 months to a year or even more. And then it can be safely transported from one place to another. So we'll have the same dispatchability what fossil fuels had, say example coal, but in a completely clean fashion. So what I really wanted to highlight about storage is, of course, timing, shifting in time is important, but it's as important to shift in space. And without fossil fuels, how do you transport heat? Like we can build grid infrastructure to transport electricity from solar and wind, but how do you transport heat? We don't have a way to transport heat, and being able to store energy, especially heat, at one place and being able to transport it can enable geothermal to be available to everybody. They don't have to have a geothermal well in their backyard to have access to clean geothermal energy. So that's basically our technology. In terms of challenges, I would say one thing that is overlooked is this is not a race of the best technology. Like energy transition is about technology, but it's not just technology. I would argue it's a small part of the whole transition. It's about the strategy. It's like the commercialization strategy, or the business aspect of it is perhaps much more challenging than the technology itself. So what we are trying to work on actively is the commercialization pathway. So, it means choosing right first demonstration partners, choosing the right first pilots, because what you do not want to do is like spend so much time building a technology, do a pilot and hit a wall. Right. So choosing a pilot demonstration which is replicable, which has a trajectory beyond it, and you're not just hitting the wall. Death by pilot is a very common term used in our industry. So that is one. But beyond that, creative business models. These are like high capex investments. Natural gas heat is still very cheap. So to justify these kind of investments over a long period of time, we need to have really creative business models. If I have to choose between technology, business model, commercialization pathway as the two big buckets of challenges, I would actually focus more on the business model and the commercialization pathway. And that's where, at Cash, we are working right now.
That is very interesting. And I want to dive into that business discussion, but Saeed still needs an opportunity to talk all about all of the great things that OU is doing and his lab and some of the challenges that he's seeing and actively solving. So before we get into these business related questions, Saeed, let's hear a little bit more about what you do at OU, what your lab does, and really what are those challenges that you see are really only being solved and need academic partnership.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. I can resonate very well with what Arpit, Derek, and Faris talked about. But let me take a step back and maybe talk in general with my hat in the university. If I want to mention just one big overarching challenge, I would say it's scaling and deployment. So many times, my experience between working with startups, they come with this very novel idea on a cocktail napkin paper, but then how do you really verify, deploy, and scale it up? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and my role in the university has been sort of leverage the resources that we had from very high tech lab scale demonstration and pilot projects that we can take these ideas and verify each step and then take it to the next level. And I give you an example. In recent projects, we are working with a company startup called GeoPower, and they are pursuing technologies for super hot rock drilling. And they are looking for technologies that can be applied to very high temperature. And you can imagine, one of the largest challenges is, what sorts of drilling techniques or tools or technologies you're going to have to take this to that level. And many times you could see that in oil and gas industry, you have such a great technologies that work in, I wouldn't say super hot temperature, but very high temperature, that you can basically de-risk and then add some components or novel, let's say, additives to it, and then take it to the next level for deploying technology at that temperature or that state. So I think a combination of partnership with the startups, university, national lab, it's all great. I think there are some let's say uh, uh, synergies that can exist and make that, you talked about the business commercialization, that accelerate that commercialization and will help them to go to market as soon as possible.
All right. Yeah, that's very interesting to think about, and talking about the partnerships and the synergies that we can find is very exciting. I think getting that first project started is always very important, and doing that pilot associated with a university is always a great idea, and using something like the DOE Geothermal Technologies Office or partnering with a national lab. I do have a question. I think it's interesting, Arpit, you and Cash Energy you've raised a seed round or a Series A. Maybe I don't know exactly the correct terms on that financial side. Paris, you and Eden, you've gotten ARPA-E funding for developing your electrical stimulation technologies. So a large overarching question here coming from the audience, as we are in this newly emerging startup space, and some of you are working on similar ideas, some are working on different ideas. How do you go about differentiating, and how do you go about seeking the funding when really it feels like we're in a scarcity of funding, and we're all kind of competing to get these same small little pies of funds? Does anybody have a thought there?
I'll take it, I guess. I'm sorry, Paris, you want to go ahead? Okay. You're right. I mean, the GTO is severely underfunded, right? I mean, that's just, come on, right? They forgot a zero for most of these, I think is what Tony Pink likes to say for a lot of these projects. But there are other offices, right, of the DOE. So OSED is a big one, Office of Clean Energy Demos. They've had a ton of money committed to them for demonstrations themselves, enough that, there are enough zeros, let's put it that way, on the fund. So OSED is a huge one, and they're still fairly high, excuse me, high cost share projects, right? Typically 50%, but that goes a long way to go raise those other 50% funds if you've got kind of the backing. Of course, it's meted out over phases, and the DOE is not maybe as fast as businesses would like to move. So there's that challenge, but really, I think the DOE is doing a great job, kind of with the resources they have to get these BOAs out the door. But they're only, they're but one source, and so you got to go well, in our case, you got to go to the VC world, you got to go to the private funding world. And you're right. There's sort of I know Arpit touched on this, but to add a little color to that, you don't want your pilot to fail or your first project to fail. So at least in our case, it's sort of a large scale demonstration, but it's in our case planned to be a commercial demonstration. So that'd be an asset, not a science project, but an actually, a revenue generating asset that can solve a need. Maybe it's not perfect, right? You're going to learn a ton on that first one that's going to enable cost savings as you move on. But at least, get your foot in the door, be able to demonstrate to investors that the technology works. In our case, most of the technology is commercialized. We're just kind of putting together, established technologies in a new way and doing it in a very efficient manner, which is kind of where our differentiation comes. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add what Derek said, slightly different perspective is government grants. There's funding, non-dilutive funding opportunities available where you can go out and maybe do some kind of cost sharing and demonstrate your first project. But ultimately, for this technology to be really impacting at global scale, you need a healthy business. You need a healthy, sustainable revenue generation. And maybe grants can help you put 3-4 first projects in, but what happens after? So what we focus on a lot is there a niche? Is there a niche? For example, I'll give you a very quick example about our technology. Once we store energy, we do not lose at all. So like we can store for a year. So are there applications like interseasonal storages where people have really long winter? Now, heating prices are very high. Heating is a main energy load. Can we find applications where people will be willing to pay more for this specific feature? Similar transportability. So picking few features which differentiate yourself and finding a market which values that feature, that it would pay you more over whatever the conventional heating or energy sources are, gets you started. Grants are good, but it ultimately has to be a healthy, sustainable, revenue-generating market. And you have to start somewhere, and you have to find your niche based on the features that you have. So that's where we focus a lot.
Yeah, I'll chime in 2 minutes. So I'm going to take the perspective of like trying to be, a venture-backed, geothermal company. Let's take that perspective, right? That's what you want to do. The main thing you could do, in my opinion, to be venture-backed is like have a super differentiated technology. And if you want to have a very differentiated technology, you need to understand the state of the art. So at Eden, the first thing that we did when we were writing the RPE proposal was just like, let's read as much literature as we can. Let's go back and let's read Tester. Let's read the DOE GeoVision report. Like, what is it that the government is saying is their pathway to make geothermal scalable? And what are the gaps that the government just identified? And then you write a government grant based on what the government just identified as the things they want to fund. And you do it, and you do it, and you put it out there. And like, you might only get 20% of the grants funded, right? Like we wrote so many grants, and most of them they get funded, but the ones that did, they got funded for a lot of money. And they have cost share, which is good for you actually. Because you take the cost share and you say, hey, I have a 20% cost share on a multi-million-dollar grant. I need to fundraise now. And you use that as a fundraising ticket. And I think that's a really good way for an early stage geothermal company to get going is write as many government grants as possible. Try, and as far as like trying to, how you're going to like differentiate it technically, I don't know how you're going to do that. That's on you. You're smart. You'll figure it out, but like write the grants, get it funded, use the cost share. That's the ticket. You go raise the money, go to all the other geothermal companies, syndicate of investors, ping them. They'll probably end up pinging you because they'll see the deal we just announced that you won this thing. That's how we did it. They came to us. They said, hey, if RPE just identified you as being a top geothermal company and you just went through a whole like peer review thing, you must be pretty good. And so that's a good way of like helping people establish confidence. You do your seed round, your Series A, Series B, et cetera, and you go down the venture route from there. As long as you start with the really differentiated technology based off your real literature, and then you leverage the non-dilutive funding as a way to help you scale your company.
That is an interesting. Go ahead, Saeed.
Yeah, if I can add something, I think I agree with talking about maybe not lack of enough funding, but at the same time, I think there are different avenues to the DOE that you can leverage, what you're doing at the startup and get funding, everywhere from, the SBIR phase 1, phase 2 grants that doesn't require cost share, go to the OSET, which is energy demonstration that, provides a lot of funding. And I agree it's cost share is an issue, which sometimes difficult to come up with 50% of the project cost. But my experience 10 years in academic, I think I haven't seen these many opportunities open since Biden administration. Not saying that is enough. Definitely, when you're comparing to solar and wind, you could see, there are maybe 20 folds more was open, in the past few years, or let's say past 5-10 years. compared to what's open together. So more needs to happen, but I think there are opportunities that can be leveraged for, getting funding. And as Terry said, it's, it doesn't necessarily funds the whole project or the whole deployment, but it can be a ticket for fundraising, from other investors.
So I want to add in a question here. It's kind of a conglomerate of several questions. We're talking about government funding. We're focusing on that. That seems to be the stepping stone that's getting a lot of the projects started and a lot of the advances being had. It seems like this is a unique perspective, though, that I guess the question here, I'll just read them. Are we looking to the government to tell us what the future of geothermal is and what that path is? Or are there underlying motives in what they are funding in terms of what specific projects? And Saeed, you point out solar and wind and how much more money they're getting. Is that almost a key as to why we are focusing on storage on this panel? We've got 2 storage companies and then 2 non-storage people. So this is kind of a larger question. What is that relationship to the government? Are we looking to them, or should we be telling the government what needs to be funded? Now, I would like Arpit, I would like your input, because I would say from this panel, you may be the furthest removed from the GTO and the DOE. So I'd like to hear your perspective first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see those two as mutually exclusive things, though. For example, what ends up happening is, like, for example, when we were getting traction, when we are, proving our technology out at a bench scale, and then we are building a pilot, we got into attention of California Energy Commission, DOE, and then they started working with us to come up with an request for proposal, like a grant opportunity, which is kind of circled around understanding what we have built and what can help us get to the next stage. So I guess, do we want government to tell us where we are going? No. But also, what we have seen, there's a really good feedback loop, where if you are going out, starting a company and building a technology, and it seems promising, you get noticed, and then you get support from the ecosystem. That's at least the case for us right now.
Yeah, I would just jump in here. I mean, I agree. We need to, lead the conversation. Really, frankly, the demand and kind of society, and therefore the business, needs to lead the conversation, right? It's like, what problems does society have, and how are we solving them with a technology that can be commercial, right? And sure, the DOE is great. I think that is an option, and sometimes can be a very helpful option. One reason why I think storage is kind of look, wind and solar are here to stay, and for better or worse, that is going to be a huge chunk of our energy generation, I think, going forward. Our intermittent renewables, right? Maybe some nuclear, but come on, I don't know about that. So in terms of where that's headed. So really, time shifting energy is huge, and storing, I think, energy is huge. It doesn't mean we can't do geothermal. I mean, we've got acreage out in West Texas where we have geothermal potential, but we're looking at doing a hybrid project where we would do geothermal plus storage, not just wind and solar, but you can store energy, really from any source. And so I think the challenge is that the value that's placed on dispatchable energy versus baseload energy is that much more in a grid that is awash in variable energy, right? So I think that's really where the markets are going to lead us. And it's going to depend on where you are, right? Europe looks a lot different than Texas, right? For example. But the globe is going to need storage. The globe is using more, intermittent power. And like Arpit said, they're not mutually exclusive in terms of using baseload with storage. Maybe you don't need as much storage. Maybe you don't need the capacity. You just need it for a little bit of peaking. Something we don't talk about in the geothermal world is that depending on the season, your output changes, right? You're using air-cooled condensers, and your power goes up. Let's be positive, goes up in the winter, right? So maybe you'd want some storage that you had been saving, a little gas in the tank, or I guess brine in the reservoir, in our case, to save for later. So my 2 cents.
There's
I can
Saeed.
add some. Yeah, I think, just going back to your question, Joe, I think you should have a forward-looking, perspective. And I don't think the government's role is really to take the technology from initiation to, successful deployment. They are, I think, facilitating, that transition to, to clean energy demonstration. And to be honest, there are examples of government has fostered, new technology development, like PDC bits. If you look back 80s, that was really hot. Now, how many wells you're drilling, with PDC bits? It's maybe 9 out of 10 is PDC bit. But anyhow, I think one other thing is that the industry in general, we have a very large industry, oil and gas, which is, which by volume and personnel and workforce is one of the largest. And I think the next phase is for them to come into the game and, and invest heavily on many of these startups, years, and help them to, pass that value of death and, take it to the market, or help them to take to the market.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's going to be difficult to scale geothermal without significant government support. And they are starting to put a lot more resources into identifying problems. And, Forge is a good example, like a whole research lab facility to be able to help people deploy new technologies. I guess there are many strategies to take. Our particular strategy is, let's see what the market is telling us and adjust accordingly. So we're not necessarily, in our case, trying to lobby and say, hey, we want you guys to fund this. We say, okay, what do you want to fund? And then we adjust accordingly to it. Just because it's a lot, we're a small startup. We have only so many resources. So how much are we really going to be able to influence DOE? If they come to you and they want to talk to you, then usually they're trying to put together a full or a program already, right? And that's how they usually operate. They talk to the market to get a feel for the startups in the ecosystem, and then they start to decide what their funding. So it isn't like they're not knowledgeable of what's going on. They're very knowledgeable. So in my opinion, I think it's a totally fair strategy to see what is the government thinking, and then apply for those opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's all very interesting, very insightful. So thank you all for sharing those comments. Now we do have time for one more question before closing remarks, and I think this is a good one. Try to keep it very short and concise. What was the key event or collaboration that gave you and your startup the momentum that you now have to go from the conceptual idea you had into being an active startup business? And Saeed, you can take it any way you want in terms of what collaboration you saw really propel one of those technologies you got to work on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there have been a lot of key moments, but one of them was, looking at the current assets with the oil and gas industry, like, oil and gas wells. And I was looking at this, that, we shouldn't really abandon these wells. There are ways that you could leverage these assets, for other forms of energy. And I think that was a key moment in terms of, thinking of, if an oil well goes into a hot reservoir and it can produce oil, why can't we just use it for producing heat or electricity, in very high temperature? So I think there are opportunities like this that exist, and low-hanging fruits that we can leverage and deploy for commercialization.
I think for Eden, that RPE moment was a really big moment for us that led to a lot of really awesome things that hopefully we start to announce pretty soon. And for that proposal, we had to put together a syndicate of really top research institutions and national labs, because we were an early stage company with few people that didn't have a lot of expertise in geothermal. So, but we had the more of the free critical thinking kind of skill set. And being a startup allows you a lot of flexibility to be able to bring in more people quickly and start to really grow your idea and your concepts. So we relied heavily on U.S. national labs to help guide us through the proposal writing process. We relied heavily on top research institutions that had geothermal focused personnel to work with us. It gave us a lot more credibility and expertise that I think helped even out our team.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the interesting thing about startups is that there cannot be one key, eureka moment which completely makes or breaks your startup. I think it's like several small things that happen over a period of time, which accumulated together get you where you are now. So, I mean, I don't think I can pinpoint one thing that really propelled us. Even if it propelled us only that far, and then we had to persist more to get to the next thing that can propel us more. So, maybe seed round, we had oversubscribed seed round that helped us, grow the team and have our first pilot live. But I say in general, startups, the journey is such that you have, very small moments over a period of time, which accumulated together gets you where you are.
Yeah, real quick, for us, it's partnerships with other renewables, right? Instead of competing with wind and solar, we're partners with wind and solar, and that's huge. And also partners on projects. In order to commercialize and really scale the technology, you got to have the commercial side, you got to have the customer, and those have been, I think, where we've put a lot of our effort and continue to put effort, but has been, I guess, a standout for us. Yeah.
That is exciting. Well, we are down to 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So everybody, you get 30 seconds, closing remarks, and then I will close us out with whatever time you leave me. Derek, since you're on the page, you get to start.
Great. Well, I have no prepared closing remarks, so I'll just say thanks for the time, and it's been really exciting to be part of really this wave that continues. Like I said, I think before, there's so many different ways to do geothermal, and there's so many new problems to use geothermal to solve those problems. So, happy to be, part of a group here, everyone on the panel and lots of other startups that are really pushing the envelope. And, I know we say we're competing for dollars, maybe a little bit on grants, but the sky's the limit and the market is huge. So let's partner where we can and move forward.
Arpit, do you want to take it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, very quickly, I guess, a very generic remark about solar energy transition. When we are thinking of deploying new technologies, we are at a stage where we are getting a second chance, building new infrastructure, which will perhaps guide our civilization for next, hundreds of years. We did it once with fossil fuel. So, let's learn from what we did wrong when we are doing it first time, and let's choose technologies and let's deploy technologies which are, not just working at one place, but let's think of the equitability of it, something that can be, deployed everywhere, something that can be used by people around the globe. So let's have equability and equity in the equation when we decide what technology to deploy, where to deploy, whom to fund. Yeah, that would save us a lot of pain going ahead. That's my closing remark.
Great, thank you. Paris, let's have
you.
Yeah,
I would say, so Eden, we started back in, I believe, 2017. So we've been seeing the geothermal ecosystem evolve for a while now. And this is without a doubt, like the most exciting period like I've ever seen in geothermal. You used to go to the conferences and nobody was there. Like now everybody's there and everybody wants to talk about geothermal. So I think if you're listening to this and you're still thinking, do I want to do a startup? Is this going to be like a real market for me to put my life into? I can confidently say yes. I think it is. And I think you should. And there's all kinds of interesting ways in which people can do geothermal, and it's not just power, and it's not only just heat for housing and in cities. You can also use heat to grow things. There's so many ways you can use geothermal energy and geothermal resources. So I think it's important for people to stay creative and look for opportunities to be able to get involved.
Thank you, Saeed.
Yeah, not really having a closing remark, but I would say this, that I see the future of geothermal very bright. The wave that started from the past few years. There are some unique aspects of geothermal that I don't think, we have in other renewables. One is that it's really domestic. You don't need to import much, and you can deploy it pretty much everywhere with a reliable base load. So I think with the right partnership and, positive mind, and also great ideas. In 5 years or 10 years from now, we're going to look back and see gigawatts of geothermal energy being deployed all over the globe, US, everywhere.
All right. Well, with that, we have 5 seconds. So thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of Pivot 2023.